When our homeowners association banned bikes on the sidewalks, they expected us to roll over. But instead, our neighborhood rolled up its sleeves. This isn't a story about bikes. It's a story about what happens when everyday people are pushed a little too far, when bureaucracy forgets what it's supposed to protect, and how sometimes the best response to red tape is a shovel and a vision. You wouldn't think a place like Maple Glen would be ground zero for a local uprising. It's the kind of place where everything is neatly trimmed, hedges, grass, even conversations. An HOA-controlled suburb tucked just outside a mid-sized American city, where beige siding and freshly mulched flower beds are practically a law, and everyone waves whether they mean it or not. We move here for the same reasons many do: good schools, safe streets, and neighbors who keep their yards tidy. There were rules, of course, but we all knew the trade-off. Structure in exchange for safety. Stability in exchange for sameness. It was a deal we made without thinking too much about it. And for a long time, things worked. Every evening, you'd see the sidewalks come alive. Parents jogging behind strollers, teenagers coasting home from their after-school shifts, kids weaving in and out on bikes with training wheels. We were a neighborhood in motion. For me and my family, bikes were more than recreation. They were how we got around. School, parks, a corner coffee shop. We rode everywhere. It wasn't just cheaper or greener. It made us feel connected. We saw our neighbors. We waved. We existed out loud. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Monday. A beige envelope, stamped with a familiar HOA logo, a tree inside a circle, meant to symbolize unity, I suppose. The wording was crisp and impersonal. Due to recent safety concerns and several documented incidents, effective immediately, bicycles, scooters, skateboards, and similar wheeled recreational equipment are no longer permitted on neighborhood sidewalks. This action is intended to preserve pedestrian safety and reduce property liability. Compliance is mandatory. Thank you for your cooperation. There was no warning, no meeting, no request for input, just a decision made in a boardroom by people we barely knew, delivered like a sentence. I read it twice, thinking I'd miss something. My 9-year-old son was already buckling his helmet for his ride to school, and I found myself holding the letter in one hand and his handlebars in the other, trying to figure out what to say. That morning, we drove, and so did a lot of others. It didn't take long to notice the difference. The sidewalks were emptier, but the streets were fuller, backed-up drop-off lines at school, longer waits at stop signs. Kids who used to ride in groups now sat in the back seats of idling cars, faces glowing from phone screens instead of sunshine. At first, we thought it would blow over. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe if enough of us wrote emails or showed up to the monthly HOA meeting, they'd reconsider. I wasn't the only one upset. A neighbor across the street, Angie, had 2 little girls who used their scooters every day after school. Now, they sat on the porch instead, swinging their feet and staring at the sidewalk like it had betrayed them. Another neighbor, Mr. Lanning, who was in his 70s and walked every morning for his arthritis, told me, "I used to enjoy seeing the kids ride by, made the mornings feel alive. Now it's just quiet." We tried to talk to the board. Several of us wrote emails, respectful, well-worded, offering solutions. Could we post signs asking bikers to slow down near corners? Add mirrors at blind spots? Even suggested scheduling bike education events for kids. Anything to avoid a blanket ban. The response we got? A copied section of the bylaws and a reminder that the HOA had full discretion over common property use. One board member, when pressed by a neighbor during a meeting, said, "This is about liability. If someone gets hurt on a bike and shoes, it's our heads on the chopping block." And maybe, buried somewhere in that bureaucratic reasoning, was a kernel of truth. But it felt like fear talking, not community, not common sense. More people started noticing. Fewer kids outside, more cars. The sidewalks were still there, empty but safe. Some kids tried riding in the street, but that created a whole new set of dangers. Cars didn't expect to see them there. Parents were more anxious. The joyful freedom of a simple bike ride had been transformed into a legal question. The tipping point came 2 weeks later. My son's best friend, Leo, wiped out trying to ride in the narrow shoulder of our street after school. Nothing serious. Scraped elbow, bruised ego. But it scared him. Scared his mom too. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook group that night. We took away the safest option. Now our kids are on the road. Is that better? The post got over 100 comments. Some sympathetic, some defensive. A few echoed the HOA's language. If people would teach their kids sidewalk etiquette, maybe we wouldn't need bans. Others said, this is just temporary. Don't make it political. But one comment stood out. What are we supposed to do? Build our own bike trail? It was a sarcastic joke, but something about it stuck. The next day, I talked to a few neighbors while walking the dog. We laughed about the idea at first. A bike trail? With what? A couple shovels and some hope. Then someone said, well, we do have that strip of land back by the creek. There's a forgotten piece of land behind the row of houses on Willow Court. A patch of green between the retention pond and the woods. It's technically city-owned easement, meant for utility access. No one ever goes back there. It's overgrown, uneven, and unofficial, but it connects almost half the neighborhood. That evening, 5 of us met in Angie's backyard. We brought maps, memories, and wine. We sketched out where the trail could run, starting near the school path, winding along the back of the neighborhood, crossing a small wooden footbridge someone built years ago, and ending near the park. We weren't builders or planners, just neighbors who wanted our kids back on bikes. Someone asked the obvious, is this even legal? So we researched. We called the city. We dug through property maps. Turns out, while the HOA governs sidewalks and landscaping, it has no jurisdiction over city easements. As long as we didn't pave it or install permanent structures, we could technically clear a path and use it recreationally. It wasn't exactly permission, but it wasn't prohibition either. The idea started to grow legs. Angie knew someone with a landscaping business who might lend equipment. Mr. Lanning had a nephew who worked for parks and recording. I had a colleague who once led a community garden project and could help with planning. It felt ridiculous and hopeful all at once. Like the grown-up version of kids plotting a treehouse in someone's backyard. We agreed to walk the potential trail the next morning. The 5 of us, with coffee and sneakers, pushing through brush and swatting mosquitoes, found something unexpected back there. Space. Space that had been forgotten, ignored, but not lost. By the time we circled back to Angie's yard, we were smiling, muddy, bitten up, but excited. We decided to meet again that weekend and invite others. The invitation wasn't formal. Just a few texts, a couple Facebook posts. Got an idea. Come by Saturday. Bring coffee and boots. 15 people showed up. We walked the trail again, measured steps, took notes, pointed out spots where the ground was too soft or where kids might lose control on a downhill. Someone brought flag markers from a garage renovation. Kids followed behind, pretending they were explorers mapping a lost land. The conversation wasn't just about the trail anymore. It was about what it meant. We shouldn't have to do this, someone said. Maybe not, another replied, but maybe this is better. It wasn't just a reaction to the ban. It was a reclaiming of community, a small rebellion wrapped in good intentions and muddy boots. We didn't know how far we'd get, whether we'd actually finish it, or whether the HOA would find some way to stop us. But that didn't matter yet, because for the first time since the letter, people weren't just complaining. They were creating, working together, sharing something bigger than the argument. We weren't just building a bike trail. We were building something that might just change the neighborhood forever. The trail didn't start with blueprints or budgets. It started with conversation, followed by boot prints. That first weekend, with orange flags marking the path like breadcrumbs, we began to see the possibilities. What looked like a tangled strip of forgotten land was, to us, an opportunity, a route, a solution we could shape ourselves. By the following weekend, the project had momentum. Neighbors brought gloves, shovels, hedge trimmers, and weed whackers. Someone showed up with a wheelbarrow. A couple of kids arrived with nothing but energy and open ears. It was messy, sweaty work. The land wasn't flat. Vines wrapped around fallen limbs. The ground was damp in places and hard as concrete in others. We fell into a rhythm anyway, clearing, chopping, raking. We weren't experts, but we had something better, commitment. There was no formal leader, though people naturally stepped into roles. Tyler, a retired landscape architect, became our trail engineer. He walked the route with a measuring wheel and flagged areas that needed grading. Natalie, whose daughter was the one who had posted on Facebook about Leo's fall, took over organizing, creating a group chat, a shared doc, and a Saturday sign-up sheet for volunteers. And me? I became a sort of trail historian, capturing pictures, taking notes, chronicling the progress so that we wouldn't forget how it started. The first 100 yards came together slowly. We cleared brush, removed rocks, dug out tree roots that had curled over the years like stubborn fingers. Some teens from the high school volunteered for community service hours. One of them, a quiet kid named Alex, came back the next week even though he already had enough hours. When asked why, he shrugged and said, "It's nice doing something that matters." Not everyone was thrilled, though. The HOA found out quickly. They noticed the increased foot traffic near the easement entrance, the piles of yard debris waiting to be picked up. An official email arrived 3 days later. Subject line, unapproved use of common space. The message warned that unauthorized modifications to neighborhood-adjacent property may constitute a violation of community standards, and that anyone participating in the so-called trail initiative might be subject to fines or legal review under municipal code. It was enough to rattle some nerves. A few people backed off, not wanting to risk the wrath of the HOA. One neighbor, who had been digging drainage trenches a weekend before, politely declined to come back, citing uncertainty and wanting to wait and see. But others doubled down. Natalie reached out to a local attorney who lived 2 streets over, and he agreed to review the case. His findings: the HOA had no legal authority over the land we were using. It was city-owned easement property, meant for maintenance, access, and recreational use, provided no permanent structures were installed. As long as we weren't paving it or installing lighting without a permit, we were within our rights. Armed with that knowledge, we kept going. Still, the HOA wasn't done. A few days later, Mr. Gupta, a kind man in his 50s who had loaned us his electric trimmer, received a letter from board accusing him of excessive landscaping alterations to his front yard and demanding he replace a mulch bed with grass. Another volunteer was fined for leaving his garbage invisible from the street for longer than the 2-hour limit. It wasn't coincidence. We realized quickly that they were trying to wear us down by targeting our homes. It was subtle, petty, effective for some, but it also galvanized others. The absurdity of it all, the fear of bikes, the sidewalk ban, the sudden surveillance of yard aesthetics, pushed the neighborhood into a new gear. We didn't organize a protest. We didn't chant or post angry signs. We built. Every rake stroke, every shovel lift became a kind of silent defiance. People started donating. A retired couple ordered 6 pairs of heavy-duty gloves online and dropped them off in a cardboard box labeled Trail Crew. Someone else paid to have gravel delivered from a landscaping supplier, 2 tons of it. Another neighbor brought over wooden stakes and string to help mark out the trail's edges more cleanly. The donations didn't come with names attached, just quiet offerings of support. Every Saturday, the crew grew. There were kids pushing wheelbarrows filled with gravel, moms and dad holding branches, teenagers laughing while laying down trail markers. Someone built a small wooden bridge over a marshy dip in the trail. Another neighbor added hand-painted signs that read "Ride with respect" and "Trail and progress, thank you." We started calling it the Freedom Trail, half joking at first, but eventually the name stuck. By the 3rd weekend, we cleared nearly half the route. People were already walking and biking the first portion. It wasn't smooth, it had bumps and muddy spots, but it was usable. And more than that, it was loved. People stopped to take pictures. They brought their kids. They talked to neighbors they'd never spoken to before. The trail became a shared space in the truest sense. Meanwhile, the HOA grew quieter. Maybe they realized they couldn't stop it, or maybe they realized they shouldn't. But the tension hadn't disappeared. It hovered, like a cloud that might or might not break. A few board members still posted passive-aggressive messages in the online portal, and at the next HOA meeting, one stood up and warned about liability exposure and road construction projects. But when she asked for a vote to take legal action, the motion didn't even get a second. People were watching now, and the tide was turning. One Sunday, As I walked the trail with my son, we came across a woman kneeling by the side of the path, planting wildflowers. "Thought it could use some color," she said. "Figured no one could ban that." It was small acts like that, quiet, hopeful gestures, that made the project feel less like a reaction and more like a revolution. The trail became a kind of backbone for the community. The same neighbors who used to wave politely from across their driveways were now shoulder to shoulder, hauling lumber or sharing Gatorade breaks under shade trees. One woman, who had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years but never knew her neighbor's name, told me, "I've made more friends in the last 2 weeks than I did in the last decade." We even started scheduling trail nights. Tuesday evenings, for those who couldn't make Saturdays. Families came after dinner. Parents dug trenches by flashlight while kids played tag in the woods. There were bug bites, twisted ankles, and one minor incident with a rake that left someone with a bruised shin, but nobody complained. It wasn't just a trail anymore. It was a symbol of what we could do when we didn't wait for permission. When we stopped treating rules like absolutes and started treating our neighborhood like a community. There were arguments, of course. Not everyone agreed on how wide the trail should be, or whether it should loop near the dog park, or whether gravel was better than mulch. But they were good arguments, real debate between people trying to make something better, not stop something from happening. The trail also brought new eyes. A reporter from a local newspaper heard about what we were doing and came out for a feature story. She interviewed volunteers, took photos of kids riding the trail, even got a quote from the HOA president, who declined to comment due to ongoing review of community compliance issues. The article ran with a headline, "Grassroots Trailblazers Paw Through HOA Tensions." It went semi-viral in our region. Other neighborhoods reached out, curious, inspired. One group from across town invited a few of us to speak at their next civic meeting. They had similar problems: overregulation, lack of kid-friendly spaces, disengaged leadership. And that's when it hit us. We hadn't just built a trail. We'd sparked a movement. Natalie launched a website, backyardtrails.org, a simple page with photos, updates, and a step-by-step breakdown of how we'd done it, from land research to volunteer schedules to dealing with pushback. People started emailing. A small group from another suburb invited us to visit their future trail site. We were just neighbors with shovels, but somehow we'd become a model. One night, after everyone had gone home, I walked the length of the trail alone. Fireflies blinked in the trees, and the soft sound of gravel crunched under my boots. I reached the top of a small hill, one we'd worked hard to clear, and looked out over the lights of our neighborhood. It struck me then, the HOA could ban bikes from the sidewalks, but they couldn't ban community. What we'd built wasn't just a workaround. It was a quiet revolution, a reminder that when rules forget the people they serve, the people still have power. And in our case, all it took was a little dirt under the nails and the will to keep digging. The trail was finished just after sunrise one quiet Sunday morning. There were no ribbon cuttings, no speeches, no banners. Just a few early risers standing at the start of the newly packed gravel path, sipping coffee and quietly taking it all in. The Freedom Trail, roughly 3/4 of a mile, stretched from the edge of the neighborhood park, past the retention pond, along the back of the Willow Court houses, and up to the school fence line. It wasn't paved. It wasn't landscaped to perfection. There were still roots that jutted out and a few muddy patches that refused to drain properly. But it was complete, and it was ours. That morning, the first family rode the full loop. A dad, a mom, 2 kids on bikes with streamers and bell handles. No cars. No helmets clutched in carpool lines. Just a path, a purpose, and a community behind it. The impact was immediate. That week, you could feel the shift in the neighborhood. The sidewalks, still empty from the HOA's ban, no longer felt like spaces lost. They were quiet, yes, but just beyond the fences, life had moved. It had evolved. You could hear laughter echo from the trail, bells chiming as kids zipped by, parents jogging beside strollers, and even an older couple walking their dog along the shaded stretch past Footbridge. The trail had become the neighborhood's heartbeat. New relationships formed in the dirt. Neighbors who'd once only exchanged nods now swapped homemade bread, tools, and even babysitting favors. There was a renewed sense of presence, as if we were all finally occupying the space we lived in, not just existing in separate driveways and inboxes. One afternoon, I saw Mr. Lanning, our 70-year-old neighbor who once lamented the silence, sitting on a folding chair at the edge of the trail, waving to every child that passed like a small-town mayor. We started holding Trail Tuesdays in the evenings. Nothing fancy, just a loose gathering of families. Kids raced each other between trail markers, neighbors brought coolers with lemonade, and someone even set up a pop-up picnic table for snacks. A few local musicians came out one week and played acoustic guitar under the maple trees. It was, without exaggeration, the most connected our neighborhood had ever felt. Perhaps the most remarkable thing, though, was a quiet surrender of the HOA. After their initial warnings and veiled threats, they stopped sending notices. It was clear by now that any action they took would meet heavy resistance. The trail wasn't a fringe project. It had become the centerpiece of the community. Trying to dismantle it would have been like trying to shut down a public park on Christmas. Still, their silence was strategic. There were no acknowledgments, no apologies, no admission of overreach. They simply stepped out of the way, likely hoping the issue would dissolve in the same quiet way it had formed. But it didn't dissolve. It flourished. Soon, other neighborhoods came to visit. One Saturday, a small group from a subdivision 2 miles away showed up and asked to walk the trail. A few of us led them through it, explaining how we navigated the legal side, how we organized volunteers, how we kept momentum when things got tough. They took notes, asked questions, snapped photos. By the end of the walk, they were energized and determined to build their own. That became a pattern. Visitors came. We walked. We talked. Eventually, we formalized the process. Natalie updated the backyardtrails.org website to include a step-by-step guide, sample emails for talking to local governments, even trail design templates. Someone else made a printable volunteer sign-up form. It wasn't just about our trail anymore. It was about sharing the roadmap. The movement grew. In 3 months, 2 more neighborhoods in our town broke ground on their own trails. One reproposed an old drainage canal. Another transformed a forgotten utility park behind their elementary school. We started calling ourselves the Trail Network. It sounded a little official, a little bold, but it fit. And still, our little trail kept evolving. Benches were added, simple wooden ones, built by a father-son duo using reclaimed wood. Someone installed a little free library near the halfway point, stocked with children's books and paperbacks. One teen in the neighborhood painted a mural on a wooden fence along the trail, showing a winding path leading through seasons, spring to winter, with a bike and walking figures in every panel. The city council caught wind of the movement and, instead of issuing shutdown notices or fines, invited us to a meeting. They wanted to know more. We presented our story, photos, volunteer numbers, community testimonials, and asked a simple question: will you help us or just stay out of our way? To our surprise, they did more than stay out of the way. They offered small grants to assist with future maintenance. The Parks and Rec Department assigned a part-time staffer to check in with the trail crew once a month. They even offered to help install signs identifying the trail as an official community connector. And with that, the Freedom Trail became not just legal, it became endorsed. The official sign went up quietly one morning, near the entrance. Freedom Trail, a community-led project, open to all. It felt like a small plaque of victory, understated and perfect. The HOA never said a word about it, but the sign remained. As summer arrived, we started seeing grandparents walking with grandkids, runners training for full races, and even a few kids with lemonade stand stationed along the trail entrance on weekends. It had become more than infrastructure. It was a social ecosystem. I remember sitting with Angie on a bench one evening, watching the trail traffic slow as the sun went down. She looked over at me and said, "Can you believe this started because of a stupid ban?" I could, because it had always been bigger than the ban. The sidewalk rule may have been the trigger, but the fire it lit wasn't about bicycles. It was about voice, about community, about the idea that people living side by side shouldn't need permission to make things better. That when leadership forgets how to listen, the community can lead itself. And we did. That realization brought a wave of reflection. We began to examine other parts of the neighborhood, Dead spaces, overlooked areas, unused corners of land. What else could we reclaim? What else had we allowed rules to keep us from imagining? It started small, a pollinator garden by the community mailbox area. Then a compost bin in a shaded lot. Then, someone proposed turning an old storage shed into a tool library. None of it was officially approved. But no one stopped us either. The same spirit that built the trail began to ripple outward. Eventually, the next HOA election came around. A few of our original trail crew members decided to run. And with the support of the trail network and a whole lot of word-of-mouth campaigning, they won. Not all the seats, but enough to shift the tone. Meetings became more open. Suggestions welcomed. Policies reviewed, rewritten, sometimes tossed altogether. The new board hosted a community Q&A by the trail, complete with folding chairs, iced tea, and an open MIC. For the first time, it felt like the HOA was part of the neighborhood, not just over it. Now, more than a year later, the trail is still alive, still maintained, still evolving. It's seen kids take their first ride without training wheels. Seniors complete their first mile since surgery. Couples walk hand in hand. Strangers become friends. And the sidewalks, they remain mostly quiet. The rule still exists, technically, but it doesn't matter, because we've made something better. Something no rule could have planned, and no letter could have prevented. As I walk the trail today, I think about how close we were to giving up, to letting it go, to saying, well, that's the rule, and retreating back into our garages. I'm glad we didn't. We learned that sometimes, when the powers that be say no, the people can say yes in a louder, better way, by building something together. So now, I want to ask you, what's been banned in your neighborhood? What rule makes no sense? What space is forgotten? Is there a trail waiting to be built behind your homes? Something that could change your community forever? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or just made you smile, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't the last trail we're building. It's just the beginning.